Hello, fictional. Welcome to the What If Essay. Today we are gonna see, what if Sona was Issei fiance? Part 3. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. Everyone watched the confrontation between Issei and Riser with interest. Akeno, having fled from Ubaluna and Ravel, arrived just in time to watch ice start forming as Issei walked towards the man, who just stared at Issei confused as to where his power came from. Shortly after her appearance, Riser's remaining two peerage members caught up and were shocked to see their king, and in Ravel's case her older brother, struggling to keep his flames alight. Issei's magic circle floating behind him expanded rapidly as he approached the man of the Phoenix clan. An icy chill flowed through the area as a layer of frost began coating everything within a 20-yard radius of Issei. I've been planning and working on this technique specifically for you, Riser. As the first opponent I use this on, you should feel honored. Absolute Zero. Arctic Wasteland. As Issei finished speaking, the frost that had started building up on everything started growing quickly, going from just a small dust-like layer to a formidable 3 inches. Riaz had to back up to Akeno's side, as even at an extra 30 yards from the edge of Issei's circle, she was feeling the chill. The two girls watched on, pleased that things seemed to have gone exactly as they planned. Ubaluna and Ravel both wondering if they'd be able to make a difference if they'd step in. Due to how quickly the ice had built up, Riser couldn't even struggle as he was encased. After a few moments, Issei's spell finally ended and he heaved a sigh of relief. However, just as Grafia went to make the announcement that Riser had been retired, the icy cocoon surrounding the man began shaking. Cracks began forming rapidly, spider webbing through the ice until he had broken free. Panting as he glared at Issei, Riser slowly recovered. I'll admit that was powerful. If I hadn't been able to melt the innermost ice just enough to wiggle around, you'd have had me. Damn. I thought I had you there. If but for a moment you did. Because of that you've earned my respect. I'll be taking you seriously now, but first. Ubaluna. Yes, my lord. Stand down. This game is going to end with this battle. Even if I win, I probably won't have the energy to beat Riaz as well. But together we can win, my lord. No. Even with taking Issei seriously, I am positive that the two of us would not be able to beat him and Riaz afterwards, especially since she still has her queen in play. As you wish then, my lord. I know you have a sacred gear. When Lord Lucifer informed the devil community of his son's return, he mentioned that. But he said he had yet to find out which gear it was. Which at the time was probably true. Let me guess. You're questioning if that spell was just my ice magic or if I used my sacred gear as well. Betting a nod in response, Issei sighed as he thought about revealing the truth of his sacred gear to more people. In the viewing box, however, the devils watching were very curious about Issei's statement, asking Surziches why he hadn't revealed Issei's gear to the Devil Council. Son, has he told you about his sacred gear yet? I learned what his sacred gear was when we Satans gave Sona's peerage the order to deal with the rogue fallen angels. However, all 4 Satans were present when he revealed it. We decided to keep it under wraps so he could grow strong enough to defend himself once it was found out by the rest of the supernatural world. He has a long illness after all. And you don't think mentioning that would have been a good idea? Considering how everyone will react, no. I mean, look at you two right now. You are acting as if he needs to be imprisoned or worse. Surzich's sharp words had the two older male devils pause for a moment as they realized what he was saying to be true. Before anything else could be said, Sona directed everyone's attention back to the screen as Issei had come to a decision. Well, to answer your question, yes, I was only capable of doing that thanks to my sacred gear here. Issei looked to Surziches, holding up his left hand with a small smile. Letting his power flow and causing the green gem embedded in the gauntlet to glow, Issei continued, I am the current possessor of the sacred gear, known as the boosted gear, and host to Drag. In other words, you are the Red Dragon Emperor and you will continue to grow stronger. I count myself fortunate to have encountered you at this point in your growth. It is an honor to fight the legendary Red Dragon Emperor after all, and if you had been just a little stronger, I might not have been able to have this fight. Let's bring everything we've got and enjoy it to the fullest then. Riser gave Issei a smile at his words, letting his power flow around him. Ubaluna, Ravel, Akeno, and Riaz all backing off even further as the two males began clashing. Akeno and Riaz were smiling as Riser had basically already admitted defeat. Ravel on the inside was smiling as well as she watched, happy to see that someone had given her brother the wake-up call he needed. She noted it probably happened when he was only just able to free himself from the icy trap Issei had created. After all, Riser was widely acknowledged as a powerful devil with his mastery over his flames and regeneration abilities. Yet to see his power seem so ineffective was a shock the blonde devil dearly needed. Issei and Riser were enjoying themselves as they fought. Now that Riser had started fighting back, his flames were much hotter and harder to freeze, so Issei settled for staying at a distance and using his ice magic to sling spears of ice, occasionally creating an ice dragon to attack the blonde devil he was fighting. Riser would melt Issei's icy attacks, instantly generating steam. Riser's attacks were blades of flame or fireballs as he tried to fight Issei's magic with his own. Issei would either dodge the fire or quickly generate ice to block the flames, creating a bit of steam in the process as well. Their clashing magics ended up generating a lot of steam, to the point that their viewers had a hard time clearly seeing the two, only just being able to see their outlines and movements. After a while, the two realized that they were getting nowhere and switched from spell casting over to melee, punching and kicking at each other in a very dangerous dance. If it weren't for Issei's boosted gear, they would have been perfectly matched in every aspect except for Riser's superior regeneration. While they blocked each other's fists with their own, or would use their forearm to bat the attack aside, occasionally one would land a hit to the other's face or chest. The two seemed to prefer using their fists, but they did lash out with a kick every so often, landing a hit to the other's side if their leg wasn't blocked or caught and used to push them off balance. Sona actually snorted at one point because the fight reminded her of an anime that she had seen with Issei. It wasn't an overwhelming beatdown for either side, as they were evenly matched despite Issei's power growing every 10 seconds since he kept the boosted gear active. That was due to Riser's older age, affording him more years of training and experience to even the playing field. Slowly but surely the battle shifted into Issei's favor as his attacks had Riser recoiling more and more. Yet to Surzich's trained eye, he knew the truth. Issei's stamina was starting to fail him even as he grew stronger. If Issei had been battling anyone else amongst the high and ultimate class devils, his stamina wouldn't have been an issue. But his opponent could regenerate from any wound he inflicted and had just as much stamina as he did. Eventually the clash between the two devils drew to a close. Funnily enough, it ended with Issei's scared gear calling out one final boost. Issei had one fist buried in Riser's gut, forcing him to bend forward slightly as the older devil had his fist clenched tightly right up against Issei's cheek, pushing his head sideways. For a moment absolutely nothing happened. But then Riser fell backwards and just laid on the ground panting heavily. Issei, not quite as worn out as Riser but still tired, fell to one knee. But they were both wearing huge grins. "I've got to hand it to you. That was one hell of a fight. I enjoyed it too." They spoke, huffing out deep breaths between their words. Neither one moved for a few moments as they attempted to regain their breath. Once he could speak without being winded, Riser forfeited the match, giving Riaz and her peerage the win. Grafia declared Riaz the winner of the rating game, and everyone was teleported out of the fake school building they had been fighting in. Issei, Riaz, Akeno, and Gasper appeared in a fairly large room that. Resting in a few of the beds inside the room were Kiba, Mitsuda, and Motohama, though they were all still awake. Issei dismissed his boosted gear and went to move to one of the beds to lay down for a while, but before he could, Issei found himself being tackled into a hug by Sona, rapidly finding himself pulled into a kiss. Wrapping his arms around her, he returned the kiss with gusto, complete ignoring everyone in the room. At least he ignored everyone until Riaz coughed and pointed out that his peerage appeared. The trio of women from his peerage congratulated him on the win, though Kaneko temporarily joined his hug with Sona, causing him to pat her head softly. At this point his familiars walked up as well. Both greeting him and praising him for the fight, though Tawny was extremely overexcited and hyper as she spoke. The older devils came by more slowly, wanting to give him a bit more time to recover before they questioned him about his sacred gear, or in Grafia's case a hug that nearly crushed his ribs. "Even though we agreed to allow this to be a private match, we still have to inform the Devil Council of the results. We also have to report that you used your sacred gear." Honestly, I kept quiet about it because I knew the trouble it would cause. But at this point I don't think I can keep it hidden much longer. Nodding at his words, the two clans' leaders thanked Issei for showing them an amazing fight before departing to meet up with the currently still in session Devil Council. Surzich's told his son that he did well and gave him a short hug as well before following his elder's lead and disappearing for a meeting with the other Satans. Waiting until his mother finally released him from the bear hug she had wrapped him up in, Issei requested for his bishop to use her twilight healing to speed up his healing. She did as asked, though they discovered it did nothing for the fatigue he was starting to feel. Declaring that it was nap time, Grafia made a magic circle around the group and took them home. Sending Issei's peerage off to relax, she brokered no arguments as she took Issei to his room and tucked him in bed to rest for a while. Once that was done, she ushered Ria's peerage to their own homes, ordering them to rest as well. Rather than immediately start resting after his birth mother had tucked him in, Issei just lay in bed, wondering if he was progressing in his combat skills fast enough to be ready for the chaos he predicted to come of having it revealed that he was the current holder of the boosted gear. It was hard to tell at times. Especially when Drake praised him for his ungodly potential, since his limit of boosts from his sacred gear was absurd. each boost doubles his power after all. Truly his limit was unheard of. Running the math in his head for the first time since before the battle with Riser, but at least the fifth time since he offered his assistance to Riaz in dealing with Riser, Issei was astounded once more by the thought. One boost every 10 seconds. That means 6 boosts a minute, and he could at this point take boosts for a full 50 minutes before hitting his limit. 6 boosts per minute times 50 minutes was 300 boosts. 2 to the 300th power was a ridiculously huge number. Did it mean he was extremely strong to be able to become that powerful, or did it mean he was weak but had the potential to become that powerful? Greg, am I really getting stronger, or do I just have the potential to use that power with certain conditions being met? I mean, sure, you could argue that being able to handle that power makes me strong, but I can't do it right away and have to build up to it. Partner, trust me when I say you are exceptionally powerful. It is true that you cannot bring forth that power right from the start of a battle, but let me ask you this: how many beings do you know have actually met their full potential, and of them how many have potential as great as you? I guess you could look at it this way. You are so strong that rather than demolish everything immediately, you ramp up the intensity until finding the right amount of power needed for the situation. You could say that you never bring more than necessary to a fight. Issei laid there mulling over Drake's words. He knew them to be true, since the dragon had never lied to him before. He was still sitting there thinking about it when the door to his bedroom opened. Granted, he was so lost in thought he didn't even notice until he felt a weight gently press into his chest. Shaking his head in shock, he turned to see his fiancée with a small smirk on her face. The two had a game going on, one that was meant solely for the two of them. They would try and catch the other unaware, starting them suddenly with a hug or a kiss. In this instance, however, Sona had upped the ante, getting close enough to cuddle her beloved before he could notice. Are you going to sit there and stare at me, or put an arm around me and sleep already? Sorry, just had to clear my head, Issei responded sheepishly, rubbing his head with one hand while the other snaked around his girlfriend's body and pulled her close as he finally attempted to rest. Sona smiled softly at him. She could tell something was off even from downstairs where she was attempting to read in the library so he could rest peacefully. But she knew that her presence sometimes calmed his mind enough to relax, which he needed to do after his battle with Riser. Sona knew Issei was strong and that he would continue to get stronger. Hell, he was pretty strong before the incident in which she had to revive him. But for him to match Riser was a shock to her. While Riser's powers might not have been as strong as Issei's, the Phoenix clan member had a distinct advantage in experience, having had years to learn the ins and outs of his power. Unlike Issei, who before becoming a devil once more couldn't risk using his powers too much without causing serious issues. Sona was so shocked by the fight that once she found him, all she could think of doing was hold him close. She supposed it was something to do with watching her love being so awe-inspiring that her brain short-circuited. Resolving herself to being a teddy bear for her future husband, Sona quietly laid there with Issei, planning to question him about the strategy that he had to have been the one to come up with. Hiding a smile, she also intended to scold him for being so bold against his opponent. After all, Issei's plan had been brilliant until he allowed Riser to regain his breath after being frozen. Once he had a couple hours of sleep, Issei woke up to the interrogation that was Sona pressed up against him, asking questions. So, now that you aren't ready to fall over on me, what the hell were you thinking, letting Riser have a chance to recover after breaking free from your ice? I didn't think he'd be able to do it. Also, as much as I dislike the guy, attacking him while he was speaking would have been rude. Well, I suppose we should be glad you didn't severely underestimate him. But now I've got to ask, how did you come up with that battle plan? I kinda figured Riser would send his peerage out in small groups using different routes, but I didn't know how he'd split them up. But based off the power I felt from his team just before the game started, I was certain that the only problems would be his one bishop. If you mean his blonde bishop, then she's also his younger sister. But continue. Alright, I was certain his sister, his queen, and himself would be the only issues. Since we were battling it out in a copy of the school grounds, I knew the two best routes for him to attack our base were the gym and the sports field. I had Kiba keep an eye for when they entered the sports field, since as a knight, I figured he would need a bit more space to work with, as his specialty is speed. But since we couldn't see into the gym, I had Mitsuda reflect some of Akeno's power to Motohama so that he'd be able to handle more than one opponent at a time. I didn't think it would wear Mitsuda out just reflecting it, but I also don't think he was able to fully reflect Akeno's lighting. I know Gasper was helping Kiba, but how did he come into play with the two perverts? He didn't, that was all Motohama. But once he got back to the base, he told us he could only absorb so much, and that once he hit that limit, he couldn't risk absorbing anymore for at least a full day. That's part of why when he and Mitsuda went to rescue Kiba, they didn't put up a better fight. Why did Mitsuda go? After watching things play out, I can tell he's a support type, not a fighter. He said he couldn't let himself be shown up so easily. Typical male pride. Then back to Gasper though, how did you keep him unnoticed until Akeno sent him back to the clubhouse? I'm not sure either honestly. I just told him to be subtle in how he controlled the battle for Kiba. I'm Skip. It had been 2 weeks since the raiding game against Riser, and Issei's human parents returned from their vacation, while Surzich's had their house remodeled. Granted, they had returned a few days earlier than expected, once again finding Issei and Sona in bed together when they decided to check in on him. Issei's adoptive father Iseki was bound and determined to believe the two were trying to give him grandkids before they were officially married. His wife Emiko on the other hand was terrorizing the two about the idea, viciously against the two becoming parents before graduating high school let alone being married. It was quite funny to everyone who had the pleasure of living in the same house. Despite the constant teasing from Issei and the lectures from Emiko, the two teens were glad to have things return to normal in the city. Though Issei had to cringe when he introduced Kalwerner and Zophiel to his parents as two of the bodyguards that Surzich's had mentioned him having. His parents might not have taken an instant liking to the two, but they did appreciate their willingness to be there for Issei. The cause of his cringe when he introduced them however was an offhanded joke from Iseki being whispered in his ear. Only 2 bodyguards son. And both women at that. Are you trying to bring in a harem? Thankfully for both males, Iseki was quiet enough that none of the women heard his teasing aside from Kaneko, who mentioned that she wanted to be one of Issei's bodyguards as well, making the older man back off on the teasing, since he knew she wouldn't let anything like his joking thoughts happen. After that, everyone got settled back into their daily routines, happy and content with the situation. None of them knowing the danger that they would soon be placed in. A danger that would push Issei into not just the spotlight in the underworld with the devils, but into the spotlight for the entire supernatural world. Around a week after Issei's human parents returned home, he, Sona, Rias were called upon by the 4 Satans. Yet they weren't told anything other than the fact that their presence was requested. Though once they entered the room they were even more confused due to the fact that the former Dragon King Tannen was also waiting for them. Nodding to the teens, Tannen turned his attention to the Satans as Surzich's began to speak. There is a situation developing that we'd like you 3 to handle. Normally we would have one of the ultimate class deal with it, but there is merit to sending you 3 instead. Tannen, you understand what's going on better than we do, so please explain. Well, my peerage King Mephisto has asked me to get your aid. For you teens, I mean Mephistopheles, the current chairman for the magical order Grober. Anyway, a large number of stray magicians have been attacking his order. Due to their numbers and the fact that a good portion of the stray mages are fairly powerful, it quickly became more of a siege than a battle. When Mephisto contacted me, they strays had been successful enough in their attacks to trap Mephisto and the higher ranking members inside of a barrier, thus turning it into a slaughter of the weaker members. If that's the case, why not ask you and the rest of his peerage to attack the mages as well? After all, if you can defeat them or get to the ones maintaining the trap, then they can be free to join you. Normally I'd say you have a point, but sadly I am the only one of his peerage members not currently trapped alongside him. Well, it's true I could turn the tide enough to let them free, it wouldn't stop the Grober's destruction. But I will be going with you to deal with the situation however. Also, my son Bova is currently keeping an eye on the situation and will be joining us. So long as the strays don't have anyone capable of stopping me, with your aid, we can save enough of the Grober members to keep the order from collapsing. Letting Tannen's words in response to Issei's question sink in for a moment, Sona turned her head towards her older sister and Issei's father. She was still curious about what he had meant by there being merit to sending them instead of an ultimate class devil. I see. That makes more sense then. But now I have to ask what the merit is to allowing us to deal with this threat instead of sending older and more experienced devils to handle it. The main reason is obviously allowing you 3 and your peerages to gain more experience. There is also a chance you could make pacts with some of Mephisto's magicians. While it is true that pacts are generally seen as more beneficial to the magician, that isn't always the case. As such, we feel it may be best for you 3 to go instead of an older devil. At that point, Seraphil butted in to explain since she was the head of diplomatic affairs. She mentioned that normally a magician would make a pact for protection, personal status, or information. Apparently in the magical world, having a strong devil backing you made you pretty popular and are wealthy. It also made it easier to buy and sell materials. Well, that wasn't really new info for Sona, it was a good recap since it also explained things to Issei. But Seraphil continued her explaining as she stated the benefits for a devil to make a pact. Devils received the same benefit of buying and selling materials easier. Devils also had discounted prices on buying magic items from the magician they made the pact with. Depending on the magician, this sometimes meant that the profits would be shared too. Another positive reason is that so long as an older magician allowed them to maintain their status in whichever order they belonged to, a magician would sometimes become a peerage member for the devil they made a pact with. The next reason that Serafral gave as a positive reason for a devil to make a pact was the one Sona was sure the older devils were capitalizing on. Magicians share their magic with the devil they make a pact with. This meant that a devil could have access to other forms of magic besides their devil magic. It also meant that if the two specialized in the same type of magic, there would be a power boost. After Serafral finished speaking, she let her words sink in with the younger devils. Sona had no problems wrapping her head around it. Riaz didn't struggle much to understand either. Issei, however, had to create an example in his head to see how it made sense. The example he came up with was similar to video game logic. Issei saw it as sharing the experience needed to level a spell or skill up, since a power boost would mean it'd be stronger, similar to how a level 2 ability in a game was stronger better than a level 1 ability. Once the teens understood why they were given the task, they all agreed it was a wise idea. After the older devils knew they were on board, the trio was dismissed to gather their peerages. The Satans began the next part of their meeting, though strategizing left the room to speak to Tannen privately for a moment. I don't know if you felt it, but there was a shift in Issei's magic during Serafal's explanation. I did feel it. For a moment it felt chaotic, but then it seemed like Drake's draconic presence forced it to calm down. Yes, it did. Please keep an eye on him and let me know if you feel that again while you are out. You think he may have something besides his ice and dragon fire? It's this ever so subtle feeling I have from him. If he does have another power, it's still dormant and overpowered by his sacred gear and ice magic. But now that he's a devil again, it won't stay asleep for long. It sounds as if you already know. I don't know for sure. This is just a precaution. You think he inherited your power of destruction? It's possible, which is why I'd rather play it safe. Alright then. I'll let you know what happens. But that the two men separated, Serzic is returning to work and Tannen using his magic circle to teleport to the Occult Research Club's club room to wait for the younger devils. Riaz and her peerage took the least amount of time to gather. After all, they didn't have much preparing to do compared to the others. Sona had to set up their excuses from the school for a bit, and Issei had to create a story for his adoptive parents about leaving for a while. Eventually, though, they all had gathered. As the oldest and most experienced, they put Tannen in charge of the group and set up a battle plan. Sona, Tsubaki, Momo and Ria would be working on disabling the barrier trap that held Mephisto. Shin, Kalwerner and Zophiel would be guarding them. Riaz and her peerage were to be joined by Kaneko to provide a distraction hopefully large enough to keep the strays from noticing Sona's group. Issei and Tannen were going to join up with Bova, and the three of them would hunt for the ones in charge of the strays. A few hours later. Everyone was in position for their assignment. Riaz and her team were going to be attacking the strays from a distance. Sona and her group had already gotten inside the Grasshopper's headquarters and found the barrier trap. Issei and Tannen calmly floating in the air with Bova, the three just far enough away to prevent being attacked early. Everything would begin with Riaz and her attack. Since she had to make sure that their distraction was large enough, Riaz built up her power of destruction. Once she was certain she'd built up enough power, she began to compress it, forcing it to strengthen itself. Struggling to hold it back, Riaz raised one hand in front of her, pointed directly at the middle of the large mass of stray magicians. Waiting until she was certain it would affect the most enemies, Riaz unleashed her newly dubbed Nova Destruction. A large beam of her power raced towards the spot she had targeted. Hitting a random enemy, the power slowly started to expand, forming a massive sphere of energy. As it grew larger, the compressed energy began leaking out, spearing through opponents at random, drawing them inside the sphere. Eventually the attack couldn't sustain itself any longer and exploded, destroying a large chunk of the land. Whistling in appreciation for the attack, Bova raced off eager to join in and left his father and Issei behind. I wish he'd learned to restrain himself. Chuckling at Tannen's words, Issei followed the dragon as the two began searching for the ones leading the strays. Issei activated his boosted gear as they moved, knowing they were likely in for a harder long fight. Riaz and Akeno maintained a near constant barrage on the waves of magicians heading their way, Mitsuda reflecting their attacks back at them, Motohama absorbing the few that got too close, Kiba and Kaneko doing their job of protecting the group, with Gasper sparingly using his forbidden Baylor view to keep them from being overwhelmed. It had already been close to 2 hours of fighting the strays. Riaz and her peerage plus Kaneko were admirably fighting off a large number of magicians, but they all knew unless something changed, they wouldn't be able to hold them off forever. Mitsuda was struggling to keep up with his reflecting capabilities. Motohama had already hit his limit for absorbing and was already pushing himself to keep up with Kiba and Kaneko. Akeno was starting to feel the strain of using so much of her power. Kiba and Kaneko were panting as if they had just finished a long workout. Sona's group, on the other hand, still struggled to deal with the barrier. Shortly after they began to work on it, they were noticed by some of the Grober members inside the barrier, who informed them that the barrier was created and maintained by over 3 dozen high-powered mages, which meant that even as strong as they were, it would take a while to make any progress. Luckily, they were able to work on disabling the barrier with few interruptions, the bodyguards handling the occasional enemy with ease. That work became an even larger breeze when a younger magician from the Grober order joined in attacking the stray magicians from behind. While he was fairly quiet, he quickly found a place with the group and found himself hoping that when the battle was over, he could spend more time getting to know the group. Eventually the fighting slowed down to a trickle, likely due to the fact that they could feel Issei outside getting serious. "Thanks for your help, Luke Garu. Friends call me Rugel though." At that, the group introduced themselves, Sona secretly hoping that when all was said and done, she could convince him to make a pact with her. She could tell he was hiding some things and knew that if they made a pact it'd be easier to find out. Rugel on the other hand was questioning himself. Normally he was both quiet and stoic, yet he found the stoic facade breaking for this group. He was wishing to be a part of it and couldn't understand why. As time passed though, he came to realize that once they got through the day, he'd ask not just to make a pact with Sona, but to join her peerage too. He was willing to go that far to find out why he was opening up to this group of strangers. Unknown to him and the rest of the group outside the barrier, the ones inside and watching them had already decided to give the okay and push the boy into joining Sona's peerage. They had seen the same thing Rugel did, but instead of questioning how and why it happened, they already knew and were happy to give him the chance to make true friends. Issei, however, had the hard part. He and Tannen had managed to catch up with Bova after a bit, and the three gave up on sneaking around when they realized just how many enemies were still focused on their surroundings, instead of just on Riaz and her group. At first it was easy just bashing a few heads together, but as they went, more and more enemies would appear at once, making it harder to continue towards the ones in control. It wasn't until they had come across a small group of Grober magicians that were also trying to get to the ones in charge before there was a lull in the fighting for Issei. Yet he still had boosted gear active and boosting throughout the small break, hoping that he could build up enough power to end it quickly when they finally found the leaders for the massive stray army they had been dealing with. Bova, Tannen and Issei had met up with a small group of about 6 magicians from the Grober. They were all fairly powerful from what they could sense, but the oldest and probably the one leading the group was heads above the others. Issei had to suppress a snort at his appearance though, as it reminded him of a certain wizard from the Lord of the Rings movies. "We thank you for your assistance, but we cannot just step back and let you handle this." I wasn't going to suggest that. Instead, I was going to offer to work together. Despite the distraction young Riaz caused for us, these strays have noticed us. Rather than try and stealthily move towards the leaders, I say we join up and create chaos to draw their attention to us. I see. So we go guns blazing, as the kids would say, and hope they come to see what the commotion is. That just might work. Sir Tannen, I agree with your thoughts. I don't know if you heard about what I tried to pull in the raiding game Riaz held against Riser Phoenix, but if you want us to draw their attention, I can try it again. I'll just need you all to stay back. Lord Lucifer informed me about your abilities while we were waiting for you, Riaz, and Sona to join us. Alright then, I've had boosted gear active since just after Riaz started her attack, but I can only handle 50 minutes worth of boosts. Since we aren't concerned about staying hidden, I'm not going to try and contain it either. When I used it against Riser, this spell could be felt even 50 yards away, and that was with only half an hour of boosts. This time I'd say it'll be felt somewhere around 90 yards away. Issei butted into the conversation and got the okay to use his ice magic. Bova tried to call him out and say there was no way someone as small as Issei could pull it off, his arrogance not allowing him to give Issei credit for something he hadn't yet seemed capable of. But Tannen just bopped his youngest son on the head and told him to be quiet and watch. Leaving the group behind, Issei marched forward, letting his ice magic flow freely, enhanced by his boosted gear. Once he was sure he had moved far enough, his magic circle appeared on the ground around him, covering a good 80 yards of space as a chill settled in the air. The wind picked up as well, carrying the biting cold out just as far as Issei had predicted. Bova tried to follow Issei to prove him wrong, but standing right at the 90-yard mark, had to jump back shuddering as he felt the icy wind. "Alright ladies and gentlemen, I do apologize for this, but it's time to get serious. Absolute Zero. Arctic Wasteland." The area covered by Issei's magic circle quickly froze over ice, rapidly building up layer after layer. This time, rather than stopping at 3 inches thick, Issei's ice continued to form until it had gotten to be a full foot thick. Only having enough time to smirk at his work, Issei was joined very quickly by his companions. "Nice work, Issei. That got their attention alright. Yes, I can feel several presences moving this way. They feel a lot stronger than those we had been dealing with before. That was an amazing spell though, young one. Was it using your devil magic or an elemental magic?" I have a very strong affinity with ice. The way my mama explained it to me, due to that unless I specifically imagine a spell using another element my devil magic will showcase that affinity. The old mage that had been leading the now allied magicians nodded his head at Issei's words. Though before anything else could be said the group of people they had felt coming after Issei's spell had made their appearance. They had lined up right on the edge of the icy wasteland Issei created and glared at the group arrogantly daring them to move. Sharing a look with his father, Bova lunged for the group of enemies head tilting back. Tannen following his son's lead did the same thing, both leaning forward just in front of their targets and unleashed intense plumes of fire from their maws. Both dragons had moved so quickly that the group of strays were only able to jerk back startled by the attack, though only two of them were able to avoid the fire. Lashing out with a scaled fist Bova caught one with a hit to the cheek hard enough to pick the poor fellow off the group and get thrown into his ally. The contact caused the two to get tangled with each other. Unable to untangle themselves fast enough, they were defeated by Tannen, who clenched his hands together above his head, bringing them down on the two like a hammer. That was too easy, Bova scoffed at their enemies, not noticing his father shaking his head, eyes scanning off in the distance. They were not the true leaders, nor were they the ones maintaining the barrier around Mephisto and the others. Has our chairman been keeping you updated on their situation? Yes, fortunately thanks to us and young Rias the group that had gone to attempt to destroy the barrier have been largely unimpeded. Choosing not to explain further, Tannen turned and led the group to continue on their path. Bova eventually took up point with his father, the two roasting enemies with their flaming breath unless they had gotten too close, in which case they'd lash out with their fists. Issei and the magicians were slinging spells off into the distance like they were grenades. Every so often they would stop and Issei would unleash another absolute zero. Arctic wasteland and draw more of the elite enemies to them to be taken down. While it was working to a degree, the ones in charge and the ones maintaining the barrier trap around Mephisto had yet to make their appearance, which was starting to frustrate Issei. Letting that rage guide him, Issei joined Bova and Tannen in the front, burning enemies with their fire breath, which thanks to Drake using Issei as a host Issei could do too. The dragons explained it as being host to Drake's soul makes the wielder of the boosted gear part dragon. Issei was glad to sub in for Tannen, smashing down any stray magicians that got too close with his fists. While he still wasn't a master of any of the styles Issei had learned and mixed together, he was talented enough that Bova was starting to respect his power. The two were actually bonding as friends pretty easily, despite the chaos they were creating, as they hunted down the ones responsible for the attack on the Grober order. Tannen had been holding back the entire time though, as he recalled his conversation with Surziches about Issei possibly having inherited the power of destruction. So far he hadn't felt anything off about Issei's power, even though he kept a very close eye on the boy. Another hour and a half passed with the group fighting this way. During a short break after a particularly large group got caught up in Issei's absolute zero. Arctic wasteland, a communication circle appeared by his ear. By this point Sona's group had been forgotten long enough to bring the barrier down, partly allowing a few of the sealed mages to join the fray, but since it was going to take too long, Mephisto ordered them to stop and join Rias. However, upon joining said Reted's group, they were attacked by a stray magician strong enough to fend off all of them. Sona, Rias, Akeno, and Tsubaki were just barely holding their new opponent off as Zophiel healed the melee fighters. Shit, alright, I'll explain to Tannen, then I'll be on my way, Sona. Tannen, they were able to get a few people out of the trap, but Mephisto sent them to help Rias. Currently they're just barely holding off an extremely powerful stray. Oh. Bova, go with him just in case. Take young Garen with you, his white magic should help your friends recover even faster. Nodding at their words, Issei stepped in the direction he could feel Sona's presence. Bova listening to his father and following Issei's lead. Garen, the magician that was to come with them, attempted to keep up but couldn't, so Bova threw him over his shoulder and they took off. Hey partner, I know you want to hurry, but don't think leaving Bova behind is a good idea. We can fix that. What do you mean we can fix that? I can't do anything besides use boost, right? I had several unique abilities before being sealed. Well, it's true my hosts can't use them right away like boost, you can unlock them after a time. There hasn't really been much need for this ability yet, so I haven't told you, but besides boost, you can also use my ability transfer. You can stock boosts and then transfer them to an ally. Unlike boost, which is a constantly working passive after you activate the boosted gear, you have to initiate it though. Just say transfer X, with X being however many boosts you are willing to give to a friend, and point at them. Following Drake's advice, Issei pointed at Bova and Garen since he was slung over Bova's shoulder and said transfer X50, smirking as Bova speed up considerably. Increasing his pace as well, the two of them sped towards his friends. They arrived just in time too. Bova made a beeline for Zophiel and set Garen down beside her so he could help with the healing before taking up a guard stance in front of them, since at that point, Issei had punched the magician attack his friend square in the face, the impact sending the man spiraling up into the air as Sona fell to the ground free from his grasp. Issei gently picked her up and set her beside their friends being healed by Zophiel. Turning back to the man he attacked, Issei launched a large pillar of fire from his mouth, angry that the man attacked his love. While still in the air, the man corrected himself and twisted around the fire, attempting to throw fireballs at Issei. Bova, keep them safe while I deal with this guy. I was going to do that anyway, but you don't get to boss me around. Bova was smiling as he responded though, leading the group to think they were just bantering. Issei dodged the fireballs being tossed his way, swiping his arms occasionally to retaliate with spears of ice. After a moment the man had landed, glaring at Issei he spoke. I suppose I should tell you my name. It's the least I can do since I'll kill you all. I'm Zal. The man introduced himself as his magic circle appeared in the air behind him. Before anyone could blink he shot towards Issei, moving faster than humanly possible. Luckily Issei had been boosting for a while and was able to keep up without an issue. How the hell can you keep up with me when I've reduced the gravity affecting me? Zal cried as his attempt at uppercutting Issei was stopped. Issei just grinned in response, using his grip on the man's hand to pull him forward, headbutting Zal. The force from their heads impacting each other knocked Zal back and hit him dazed long enough for Issei to slam his gauntlet-covered left fist into his gut. The fist buried in his gut caused Zal to double over. Capitalizing on the weakness, Issei brought his right elbow down on the man's back, causing him to spit out blood. By this time though, Zal had snapped out of the daze he was in and grabbed Issei's left fist, swinging him off to the side. Creating a small magic circle in his free hand, Zal attempted to dice Issei to pieces with wind. Thanks to his instincts, Issei was able to prevent most of the damage by breathing out a small plume of fire. One wind blade did manage to slip past his fire and cut a nice gash down his right arm, but Issei ignored it. Pulling his arm free from Zal's grasp, Issei pushed off the ground with his right hand, flipping his body in a way that the arc brought his foot down towards Zal's head. It was blocked however, but Issei, anticipating it, flicked his fingers towards Zal, launching a few darts made of ice into the man's chest. Shocked by the sudden cold feeling on his chest, Zal looked down before ripping the darts out of his chest. Thanks to that movement, Issei was free to stand up and put a bit of distance between the two of them. As he did, Issei created a sword with his ice, shocking the few devils still conscious and watching, since he and his training partners kept it a secret. I'm not as good with a sword as Shin or Kalwarner, but if you want to stay with melee combat, it'll give me some extra reach, Issei taunted the man, not giving away the real reason he planned to use the sword if Zal continued to try and fight with his fists. Truthfully, the ice the sword was made from was cold enough to instantly cause frostbite to any wound it created. Sadly, the chill in the air tipped Zal off to Issei's intent. I'm not stupid, you'll freeze me to death with that thing. Zal shouted before creating a few fireballs and throwing them at the sword, intent on melting it before Issei could use it against him. Knowing his idea wasn't going to work, Issei let go of his sword and lunged under the fire coming his way. He managed to tackle Zal around the waist. Lifting the man over his shoulder, Issei leaned back and hammered Zal into the ground, letting go as he did so he could spin around. Issei turned just in time to block a fist that was aimed at his back, slapping the hand away with his right hand. He retaliated, his left fist connecting with Zal's knee. The force twisted the man's leg awkwardly as he cried out in pain. Not caring about just defeating the man, Issei proceeded to brutally beat Zal until he was just a pile of broken bones wrapped in human skin. That was for threatening my friends. This is for pissing me off by harming my fiance, Issei spoke as he pushed his palm against Zal's chest, a blade of ice connected to his wrist. The ice pierced through Zal's heart, pulling away. Issei turned back to his friends. Whistling at how brutal Issei had gotten, Bova told everyone awake to remind him not to get on Issei's bad side. Grinning sheepishly, Issei just told him never harm Sona and he wouldn't have to worry. By this point Zophiel and Garen had healed everyone, though Sona was the only one that wasn't still out from the thrashing they had gotten by Zal. That didn't last long as Rugel woke up. Noting Issei and Bova, he sprang into a defensive posture in front of the recently healed members of Sona's peerage before realizing that they were friendly. He didn't say anything though as he relaxed, leaving Sona to explain about their new friend. Once she was done, Issei just turned to him and bowed. Thank you for keeping her safe. Sona means everything to me. Rugel just nodded his head and stuck his hand out. They shook hands and that was that. Issei and Bova were itching to get back to the fight, though they thought it wise to wait until the entire group was awake again before moving out. As they sat there, the battle was winding down. Since Sona had managed to free some of the higher-ranked members of Grober, the ones in charge had finally stepped out onto the battlefield. They could feel new strong enemies falling one by one to either Tannen or the one Sona freed. Eventually everyone was awake once more. I don't know about you all, but I can still fight. I'm going back to helping my dad fight these pricks. Hineko, Zophiel, Kalwerner stay here with Sona and Riaz. You all earned a rest. I've still got plenty of power and energy, so let me handle the rest. I'm going too. I know my grandfather sent me with you too because I'm still a bit inexperienced, but there is no way in hell I'm dropping out of this fight now. I may be decent with white magic, but my specialty is elemental magic. Nodding at Garen's words, Issei used his transfer to give Garen and Bova some boosts once more, and the trio took off, not waiting for responses from the other devils. Riaz shook her head, muttering about her nephew possibly becoming a battle junkie. Sona on the other hand pouted as she had hoped Issei was going to be extremely loving and protective over her after Zul's threat. Then she realized he was rushing off into battle and was likely to get hurt, her pout turning into worry for her future husband. The trio of teams racing back towards the fight were intent on ending the long drawn-out battle. Considering he had given some of the boosts away to Bova and Garen when they rushed to Riaz and Sona's aid, Issei was feeling pretty good about himself. He had said to give 50 boosts to Bova and Garen, but unlike his intent, which was for each of them, get 25 boosts worth, thinking it divided the boosts between targets, it gave both of them 50 boosts. Once he realized that Issei was excited. Zul seemed like he was a key player for the stray magicians, and he had been defeated without Issei using the full extent of his power. Which meant even if Zul wasn't one of the leaders or ones maintaining the barrier trap, he still had a chance at being strong enough to deal with them. After all, he now had 10 minutes worth of boosts before hitting his limit once more. Since he hadn't asked Drake to start using boosts to replenish the transferred boosts, Issei decided to do that as they ran. Bova was eager to fight. While he had been dealing with a number of enemies himself when they had been with his father before, they weren't really a challenge. He hadn't expended much energy or effort to beat them. He was itching for a good fight, one that made him feel like he was needed for this battle. As much as he liked to fight, if it wasn't on his terms, Bova needed to feel like it was necessary for him to do it. That was why he wanted a real fight, not the curb stomping he had been giving out. Baron, however, was preparing a few secret weapons to help him get the edge he needed to show his grandfather that he was capable of stepping up to this level. He had already done all the calculations needed for several new spells, and rather than possibly losing them, he pulled out his grimoire and recorded them. He also unclasped his most recent creation from its holster on his back. Baron was extremely talented for a young magician. He specialized in elemental magic, having affinity with ice, lighting, and wind. He also had a fairly decent grasp on the healing and supportive spells from white magic and had enough talent with alchemy to craft both his grimoire and the staff he unbound from his back. The staff was designed to help him defend himself while casting his spells, but thanks to some help he received while crafting it, the runes etched into it granted him an endurance boost so that he could stay in the game as long as needed. Now that the trio had prepared themselves, they burst onto the scene just in time for the ringleaders of the assault on the Grasshopper to show themselves. You all have been annoying thorns in our sides. I think it's time we got rid of you. Lose the arrogance, Bogart, clearly they are worth us taking this seriously. Denmer is right. They have been fighting off the peons and yet still have the energy to stand before us. Well, they have the same numbers we do, not the little mater. Defeat your opponent, then gang up on the others. But that order all hell broke loose. Last time. Well, they have the same numbers we do, not the little mater. Defeat your opponent, then gang up on the others. But that order all hell broke loose. This time. Issei, Bova, and Garen were simultaneously attacked. Garen swiped his staff in front of him, shattering the icicles that were thrown at him. Bova took a small breath before letting the air out in a puff, similar to how someone would blow a candle out, effectively cancelling the fireball that was flung at him. Issei spun around the slicing winds that were streaking towards him. Somehow the three boys were in sync with each other, Garen stepping back as he shifted his grip on his staff so that he could wield it one-handed, while the other pulled out the small black leather-bound book that acted as his grimoire. Issei and Bova stepped forward, both leaning back before unleashing massive infernos from within their open jaws. All three boys knew that they didn't have the time to play around. Rather than letting themselves be separated and picked off, they stuck together, making themselves stronger. Thanks to his grimoire, Garen was chain casting his elemental spells so rapidly that the weather shifted to a malevolent thunderstorm, which condensed and focused its lightning strikes to line up timing-wise with the streaks of lighting Garen had flowing from his fingertips. This meant that any opponent unlucky enough to be caught by Garen's attack had to suffer twice the damage as they were struck from above as well. Bova was launching fireballs left and right, not bothering to aim perfectly. Catching on to Garen's plan, he used his fire to box enemies in long enough for Garen to strike. Though there were a few times he had to kick away one of the three stray magicians before they could get too close. Issei, like Bova, would push back anyone that got too close, but for the most part focused on trying to catch their opponent's mid-dodge from one of Bova and Garen's attacks. Using his enhanced capabilities to be precise with his icicle darts, hitting enemies when there was no possible way to dodge. For anyone watching the trio fight, it was very uniform and instinctual. Almost as if the three were one person with how in tune they were. Though it was fairly interesting to see them attempting to burn, freeze, or paralyze the stray magicians they were combating. Unfortunately, the mages were older and more experienced, not letting the power from the teens shake them. Despite having an advantage in power and working so well together, their enemies were able to fight back, creating a stalemate. One of the trio of villains generated long powerful blades of wind, fast enough that unless Issei and Bova purposefully stood in the way with their flame-breathing technique, there was no way to block them. Another attempted to destroy the teens with massive fireballs, though he occasionally stopped to infuse his flames into the winds his ally generated, forming small fire tornadoes that Issei had to flash freeze in order to stop. The last member made blades of ice, valiantly jumping towards the teens in an effort to slice them up, rending the ground when he missed. The clashing spells being thrown back and forth were of a high enough level that the terrain around the fight was being reshaped, quickly becoming a barren stretch of land littered with small craters, gashes, and burn marks. The combatants dancing around each other seeking to gain an upper hand. The chaos of the battle made it hard for anyone to get near, not that there was anyone currently able to do so, as both sides' allies were locked in struggles, only able to glance at the battle for a few short seconds before returning their attention to their own battles. Eventually, the group of 6 realized that nothing would change if they kept up attacking in the same manner, changing fighting styles. Bova charged in, fighting hand to hand with the one that was previously sending fire at him and his 2 newfound friends. Bova, being a dragon, had the upper hand in physical might, but his enemy stubbornly held his ground. Garen started a rapid-fire contest with the one that had previously been making swords of ice. The two circling each other as their spears of ice clashed between them, neither one able to outpace the other. Issei and the one that generated the strong blasts of wind quickly locked themselves into a fist fight just as fierce as Bova and his opponents. Sadly, Issei left one opening that his wind-wielding magician enemy was able to take advantage of, slamming his palm into Issei's chest, with a small tornado smashed between the two before unleashing it and sending Issei flying away. Since he knew the teen was a dangerous foe, he followed after Issei, intent on finishing him off and returning to help his companions. Issei managed to avoid taking any damage when he was finally able to stop flying through the air like an arrow. He had just enough time to stand up properly before getting pulled back into combat. Ducking under the wind-coated hand that was aimed at his head, Issei turned and buried his shoulder in the magician's side. Once he made contact, Issei lunged, his feet cratering the ground around him as he pushed his weight into the man he was fighting. The forceful shove startled the man just long enough for Issei to bring his armor-clad fist forward in a devastating blow to the face. Growling in anger, the man tried to kick Issei in the stomach. Noticing his movement, however, Issei dodged the limb, ducked low and lashed out with his own, sweeping his enemy off his feet. Jumping away, Issei leaned back as he sucked air in, before unleashing a blisteringly hot plume of fire from his mouth. His enemy flicked his wrists, generating a small gust of air to redirect the flames away, earning a chance to stand up. Summoning a raging wind, the man used his hand to guide it into acting like claws as he swiped his hands towards Issei. "Hey partner, I've got an idea. As you know, you are part dragon due to being my host. Well, you can generate draconic energy and attack with it too. Since you're fully boosted right now, there is no way this guy will be able to stop it. I'll guide you through the process." "Alright, let's do this, Drag." Letting his body move on autopilot, Issei followed Drag's instructions, finding it surprisingly easy to generate and use the draconic energy. Since it was focused inside the gauntlet that is the boosted gear, Issei caught his enemy's fist in his right hand and held the man in place. Opening his left hand, the energy seeped out of the boosted gear and condensed into a sphere in his palm. Once he was sure that the energy was stable enough, Issei grinned, unleashing it in the form of a beam that disintegrated everything it touched, completely destroying the man. That's a pretty cool ability. It needs a name though. I'll call it Dragon Shot. In his head, Drag snorted at the name but told Issei to stick with it since he couldn't come up with anything better. Sighing at the dragon, Issei went to speak with him about learning what abilities he could learn and use thanks to being Drag's host. Before he could do so, he remembered that he was supposed to be helping end the siege on the Grober. Dashing off towards where he could feel Bova, Garen, Tannen, and the others that were fighting the leaders, Issei built up his magic power. He was intent on ending the battle quickly. Only pausing long enough to utter the words Absolute Zero. Arctic Wasteland. As he unleashed his spell, his allies that had seen it in use before backed off, managing to pull those that hadn't out of the way just in time. His spell trapped all but one of the leaders of the attack inside layers of ice far quicker than any of his previous uses of the spell, though that might be because the area was already fairly cold from all the ice magic being slung around in the fights. Since Issei was fully boosted, just the act of letting his massive power been seen for just a moment as he cast the spell was enough to make the remaining stray magician cower in fear. Once Tannen and the other adults returned to his side, the battle was officially ended as they forced the remaining man to call off the attack. 2 hours later. Ria's, Sona, and Issei's peerages gathered together with Tannen and Bova to receive thanks from Mephisto for saving his order. Mephisto and a few of his older, higher-ranked members were there to thank them and make a few offers to the teens. The well-respected witch and mother to Loup-Garou, also known as Rugel, was one of the members there. As was the older man that was Garen's grandfather and leader of the group that Issei, Tannen, and Bova fought alongside. The two of them had seen and heard of how the teenage devils interacted with a certain pair of younger magicians. They had discussed their idea with each other and were about to present it to the group as part of Mephisto's thanks for their aid. Sir Mephisto, if I may, I have heard a lot and seen a bit of how my son Loup-Garou interacted with Miss Citri's peerage. Not only do I give my permission, but I recommend that she be allowed to make him a peerage member and form a pact with him. I will second that and also put forth my grandson Garen for the same reasons, though instead of Miss Citri, I recommend him forming a pact with young Issei here. The two adults spoke, with the old man stepping forward to place a hand on Issei's shoulder as he spoke. Mephisto took their words into consideration for a moment before nodding and saying that should the two young magicians wish it, he would allow them to do so. Garen and Loop were called to the meeting and informed of the adults' ideas. They also received a lot of praise for stepping up and making it through the battle, Garen in particular, since he was able to stand up against the leaders of the attack. Loop instantly took up the offer, wanting to find out why he felt so at ease with Sona's peerage and why he was able to bond so quickly with them. Garen took a few minutes to mull it over before nodding as well. He felt that he and Issei would get along fairly well, and after seeing him in action, he knew they had a similar elemental affinity, which would make it easier to work together. Since everyone was tired, Issei and Sona decided to wait until they got home to give the two mages their evil pieces so that when they collapsed from exhaustion, it would be in a place they could sleep. Agreeing with Tannen to meet up the next day to report to the four Satans, the teens used a giant magic circle to return to Kao. However, Bova tagged along, giving these words as his reason. I want to join your peerage too, Issei. You're strong enough to earn my respect and to be a great training partner. There's also the fact that you and Garen are so easy to get along with that I'd already call you two my best friends, despite only knowing you two for less than 24 hours. Nodding at Bova's words, Issei said they'd wait until tomorrow on that and see what Tannen thinks of the idea, though he filled Bova and Garen in on the home situation. Riaz and her peerage left for their respective homes, as Sona sent her peerage to their homes, arranging for Rugel to stay with Shin temporarily after joining her peerage. Issei, however, made sure that Garen and Bova had gotten introduced to Kaneko, Kalwerner, and Zophiel, since they were going to be teammates as part of his peerage. But that the teens trudged through the city to Issei's home, introducing the two newest members of his peerage as new bodyguards to his adoptive parents, and Rugel as one of Sona's new bodyguards as well. Letting Bova and Garen pick their rooms, Issei gave Garen his second bishop piece before leaving them to settle in. Sona gave Rugel 4 pawn pieces before letting him rest. The next day the teens gave their reports to the four Satans, with Tannen agreeing to Bova's plea to join Issei's peerage. Taking a moment to think, Issei decided to give Bova his second rook piece. Once the teens were dismissed, Serziches pulled Tannen to the side. Did you notice any change in Issei's magic while you were combating the strays for Mephisto? None. Though there were 2 brief moments where I was unable to pay close enough attention. I see. If he has the power of destruction, it may well be a while before it awakens and manifests itself. After all, with Issei being host to Drag, he might not need another power anytime soon. In other words, if Issei has the power of destruction, his body is holding it back until he needs it, as if his powers are sentient enough to determine when and if he needs them. Stranger things have happened. Though I wouldn't be surprised if Drag had something to do with it. I wouldn't either. Anyway, I've got to get back to the meeting, you are free to leave now. But the teens. Issei, Sona and Riaz had dismissed their peerages to do whatever they wanted as the three chatted about their plans. We didn't do too bad, and if it weren't for how long we'd already been fighting, I don't think you would have needed to save us, Issei. We were pretty worn out by then too. It doesn't help that Kalwerner, Shin, and Rugel were caught off guard with Zul's first attack. Honestly, if it weren't for having the boosted gear, I'd have had to stop after rescuing you. Thankfully, when I use boost, I'm able to increase my stamina and endurance too. In other words, we're still pretty weak. But is training on our own going to help, or do we need to ask for more training? Let's hold off on getting help and work together. I know Shin still trains with you, Issei. What if the close combat fighters from Ria's peerage join you guys? Having a different person to work with might help. Then Rias and Akeno can work with you and Tsubaki as well. But what about Gasper? As a supportive fighter he doesn't really have anyone to train with. Nonsense, Rias. Here's the categories we have. Offensive magic, supportive magic, melee fighters, and balanced fighters. For offensive magic we have you, Sona, Tsubaki, Akeno, and Ria. Supportive magic users are Gasper, Momo, Mitsudayura, and Zophiel. Melee would be Motohama, Kiba, Kaneko, Kalawiner, Tomo, and Shin. Balanced fighters are myself, Garen, though he's less melee-oriented, Rugel and Bova. In other words, when we're training we divide into these groups and work together to get stronger. Yup. Though I think we should also change it up a bit and make everyone step out of their comfort zone. If we can get everyone to be more balanced then we could pair up however we wanted for training. Somewhere in Kuo. Ah, they're back. I wonder where you all went. Not that it matters. Everything is almost in place. Soon this world will be plunged into war. The devils of Kuo had altered their training sessions to match what Issei had suggested. After ascertaining everyone's current level, Issei, Rugel, and Bova worked together to create a plan. They had decided on a 4-day cycle. Everyone would take 1 day to focus on their specialty. Then bringing the groups together there would be a day devoted to magic, both offensive and defensive. Then a day to rest. The last day of the cycle saw everyone come back together focused on physical might. Then they'd revert back to the first day. On the 5th day after setting up the new training routine, a messenger appeared to the trio of peerage kings. Lord Gremory had finally succeeded in doing something he had been asked shortly after Ria's raiding game against Riser. Originally after the match she had approached her father, wanting to have Issei named as the new heir of the Gremory household. However, before that conversation had been finished the two devils realized that with time Issei would be strong enough to take over as one of the 4 Satans. So in an effort to help prepare him for a leadership role, they instead decided to have him petition the Devil's Council to make Issei a joint controller of the Kuo territory. He had finally succeeded in his lobbying. However, their celebration was cut short. Just as everyone went to congratulate Issei, he received a call from his adoptive mother. His childhood friend Irina had come back to town for a bit and wanted to visit. At that moment his familiar Tawny had mentally linked with him. "Master, there are 2 young women dressed like priestesses in the house." "I'll be there shortly, Tawny. Also one moment, I have something to say to you and Tiamat, so I'm linking her in Tiamat. Tawny, I almost forgot to thank you for all your hard work. Despite the fact that I haven't really given either of you two a lot of orders, you two have really helped with handling our contracts. All I've done is hand out the contract papers, Master, no need to thank me. As your familiars we are linked to you. Since we have your permission it's fairly easy to use your devil magic to make your contracts for you. After all you're pretty busy maintaining your human life. Still I felt that I needed to thank you too. Anyway, let me wrap things up with Rias and Sona, then I'll be home to deal with the 2 women." Tawny. Explaining things to Sona and Rias, Issei quickly left the meeting intent on finding out who the 2 women dressed like they were from the church were. Upon getting home he saw that one was most definitely his childhood friend Irina, but he didn't know the blue-haired girl that was with her. "Good thing you got home so quickly. Your father is going to be home late because of work and I just got called in as well. Hopefully you have fun catching up with Irina." "Alright, bye mom." After that it was silent. Issei and Irina both awkwardly trying to figure out how to bring up the topic of why things were so different. The blue-haired girl wanted to give her friend a chance to figure things out but quickly lost her patience. "Will you two just speak already?" Both Issei and Irina flinched at the brunette's words. Taking a breath Issei spoke. "It's been a while, Irina." "Yeah. A lot has happened since you moved away." "It seems like it. Since this is so awkward I'll just give you the summary. I was kidnapped from my cradle as a baby. The one that did it managed to change my genetics to make me a human, so I wouldn't be found. It turns out I'm actually the son of the current Lucifer." At that the blue-haired girl's hands moved to the object on her back, but Irina stopped her. "No, Zenobia. Remember, we're supposed to ask the devils to stay out of our way, not attack them." The brunette shrugged Irina's hand off of her and stepped back. "I'm sorry, but why are you supposed to ask us to stay out of your way? You're not one of the devils in charge of the territory, so it doesn't matter. Either take us to the 2 heiresses or I'll cut you down for being in our way." The now identified Zenobia spoke haughtily, thinking that she'd easily be able to defeat Issei since she didn't feel much power from him. But without prompt the boosted gear appeared on Issei's hand and Drake started to speak. "You foolish girl, Issei shares control of this territory. Just because my host keeps his power contained does not mean he is weak enough for your pathetic shard to best him. How do you know what I carry? Do you not think that I, Drake, the Red Dragon Emperor, wouldn't recognize the aura of a holy blade such as Excalibur? Both of you currently possess shards of that blade, but even together you stand no chance. As my host he is part dragon, thus weakening the holy power of those blades even further if turned upon him. Enough. Drag, quit egging her on. Besides it was only made official today, there's no way they would know that Sona and I are the ones in charge of this territory now, but if it's something that serious both Riaz and Sona need to know anyway. Quickly using his magic Issei created a communication circle with both his red-headed aunt and fiance. He told them to get over here so they could find out what the church is doing in our territory. Before his magic circle even disappeared their circles formed on the floor as the two teleported in. Now then, all three of the high-class devils are here. What business do you have with us? Sona commented trying to take control of the situation. Zenobia who was glaring daggers at Issei and Drag didn't speak instead motioning with her hand for Irina to explain. Irina told the trio of devils that the fallen angel Cabial had stolen 3 of the Excalibur fragments and the church had traced him to Kuo. They were sent each of them armed with a fragment as well and tasked with keeping the devils out of their way while they got the fragments back from Cabial. After that a short discussion broke out about either helping them or staying out of their way. Issei in favor of working with them, while Irina and Zenobia both were adamant about not getting help from the devils, even going so far as to accuse them of working with Cabial. I can assure you none of us have anything to do with that warmonger. If it weren't for how your friend here is glaring at my nephew and how my knight Kiba will take this news I'd offer to help you. While I normally wouldn't care one way or the other, your companion is looking at my fiancé like she wants to kill him. I'll stay out of your way, but if she does anything to him, well let's just say you better pray he deals with it before I find out. Wait, fiancé? Didn't I tell you I got engaged? No. Sorry. At that both Riaz and Sona turned to Issei, wondering why he was speaking so casually to the more friendly of the two girls. He formally introduced her as his childhood friend and the two relaxed slightly, though Sona feeling a bit possessive, latched onto his arm, purposefully placing her hands so that the two could see the ring. Eventually though Zenobia had enough of just glaring at Issei. There is no possible way that dragon in your sacred gear is right. I challenge you to a spar. I don't care what happens when I win other than I prove that beast wrong. Since it seems suicidal to me for just the two of you to be sent to deal with Cabial if I win you have to accept our help. Deal. The two teens stood up and walked outside, leaving the rest to watch in a mix of confusion and fear. Issei led Zenobia to the school grounds because of the space it would offer for their battle. Despite trying to talk Issei out of it, Sona was unable to and left on the sidelines to watch and cheer her love on. This is just the first clean hit you two. There is no need to try and kill each other. Irina called out hoping that they would listen and she wouldn't end up trying to prevent a war. Thankfully Issei and Zenobia both nodded at her words. Unwrapping the sword on her back Zenobia revealed the shard she was given to be Excalibur Destruction. Meanwhile Issei just let go of the tight hold he had on his power and activated his boosted gear. They circled each other, neither one making any other movement as they studied their opponent. Around the time they had finished the second circle there was an unspoken agreement between them as they charged each other. Zenobia swung her sword downwards with a heavy two-handed strike. Issei dodged to the side, lashing out with his gauntlet-clad left hand. Zenobia moving faster than he had anticipated, managed to bring her sword guard up in time to block his punch, yet the force made her slide back a few feet. Not willing to give her an inch Issei followed, swiping his free hand as a magic circle appeared on the backside. Ice generated and wrapped around his hand turning into sharp claws as he swept at the girl. Zenobia using one hand spun her blade, quickly slicing the ice and making Issei jump back as the sword was suddenly halted mid-spin before thrust towards him. Stabbing forward once more Zenobia attempted to make Issei back up even further. This time however Issei ducked under the blade lunging forward and knocking the girl's legs out from under her. Thanks to his momentum however the two tumbled over each other for a moment, the shock of her back hitting the ground was just enough to loosen her grip on the handle of her Excalibur, leaving Zenobia weaponless as they finished tumbling. Issei who was on top quickly jumped up and back as she swung her fists at him, pushing him back until she was able to grab her sword again. Yet she was unable to do so as instead of blocking or dodging the last punch, before she planned to crouch and grab her blade, Issei caught the fist. Using the hold he had on her Issei threw her hand out to the side, shifting her center of balance enough that she would be unable to defend and buried his fist in her side. Issei wins. Irina called out, hoping her friend had calmed down enough and wouldn't push Issei any further. After all she noticed he hadn't even used any boosts, instead only calling out the boosted gear to use as his weapon. Luckily Zenobia caught on to that as well. Sighing in frustration she gave in and accepted his offer of help in dealing with Cabial. But that Irina stepped forward to explain that Zenobia wielded Excalibur Destruction and she had Excalibur Mimic. She also pointed out that Cabial had stolen Excalibur Rapidly, Nightmare and Transparency. However before the teens could get any farther, an injured Kiba stumbled into the group as he looked for Riaz. Riaz attempted to help him recover, while Issei called for Zophiel and her twilight healing to make it easier on them. Despite the anger Kiba showed the two Excalibur wielders, he accepted the plan, though Riaz knew he was already plotting to attempt to destroy the Excalibur fragments if he got the chance. "How'd you get so injured, Kiba?" "I ran into a stray priest. Turns out he was an exorcist and specialized in swords like me. At first we were pretty equal, then he pulled out a second blade and I couldn't keep up. After that second sword came out I couldn't do anything, it was over in the blink of an eye. All I know is that blade had a holy aura a lot stronger than his light sword he started with." Zenobia and Irina shared a look at that before nodding. "It sounds like that stray was one of Cabial's people. The second sword sounds like Excalibur rapidly. Can you tell us what the man looked like?" "He had silver hair. He was also extremely vulgar." "Fried Selzen. He's wanted by the Vatican because he betrayed his oath and began killing indiscriminately. You must be a talented swordsman yourself if you were able to keep up with him before he started using an Excalibur fragment. He was considered a genius swordsman before he was even 13. Kiba was silent at that. No one present besides Riaz knowing why. Unfortunately it was his burden to share, so Riaz chose to stay silent, only giving her knight a knowing and comforting look. However, he didn't speak at all, only offering a nod of thanks to Zophiel once she was done healing him. "I'll be honest. Despite how strong we all are, I doubt it'll be enough to fight Cabial. At best we could stall him." "You're joking, right? 2 Excalibur fragments, the boosted gear, 3 high-class devils and their peerages, and you say we can't beat him?" Cabial is a former cadre class fallen angel. There is no way he doesn't have the power to back that title. "So you think a cadre class enemy is stronger than 2 Excalibur fragments and a Longinus class sacred gear?" "I think he's far older and more experienced with his power. I never said he'd be able to wipe the floor with us, but I don't think we could just simply overpower him like you think we could." Issei's right. Even if together we have more power than Cabial, it doesn't mean that he can't beat us. As old as he is, Cabial has to have enough experience to handle all of us, and even if he doesn't, who said he'd fight us alone? As the argument went on, Sona secretly stepped away and created a communication circle. Contacting her sister Seraphil, she explained the situation. Seraphil jumped into action, saying that she'd mobilize her peerage to deal with Cabial, but it would take a while for them to gather. She also claimed that she'd pass the word to Azazel, since it's his job to determine what Cabial's punishment for going rogue is. What she didn't tell Sona was that Strategizing was in the room with her and that he was also sending his peerage. Though neither of the two Satans could immediately aid the teenage devils. Despite their desire to help out, the two still had to deal with other matters. They were also hoping that the younger devils could use this situation to grow stronger. After all, the teenage devils were strong enough that the two Satans were sure they'd hold out at least long enough for their peerages to arrive. "Rafie is going to be pissed at me." "Why's that, Strategizing?" "She's the one member of my peerage I'm not sending. She knows they need to get stronger, but I'm afraid she'll step in too quickly. I don't want them to be harmed. Yet at the same time I know that life and death situations tend to help people push past their limits and grow even stronger, either during the situation or after they survive and find themselves determined to improve." After having both Seraphil and Strategizing tell her to hold out until their peerages could help, Sona tuned back into Issei's argument with Zenobia on if they would be able to beat Cabial. Signaling for them to stop, she relayed the words of the two Satans to the group. Nodding at her words, Issei began planning how best to proceed. Since they didn't know Cabial's entire plan, they had to find a way to get more information on the subject. "We need more information about his plan. After all, I'm fairly certain he doesn't need the Excalibur fragments to defeat us. The only reason I can think is he plans to use it to kill us and blame it on the church, causing the devils and angels to go to war so he can sweep in with his loyal followers and attempt to finish both sides off. But that wouldn't happen since the Satans have known for a while now that he's gone rogue, right? They'd know he was the one that did it and target him, not the church." "True, but maybe he doesn't know that. After all, he went rogue after Azazel told his fellow fallen angels about his intent to call a truce with the devils. There's a possibility that he doesn't know how much Azazel has shared with the Satans." Issei, Riaz and Sona debated why Cabial would steal the fragments, but they couldn't come up with a definitive answer. Sighing, Issei declared that it was time to do a bit of recon. He hoped that even if they didn't find Cabial himself, they'd find the mysterious Fried Selzen that Irina and Zenobia thought attacked Kiba. After all, if they could pin him down, then Cabial would lose one of his Excalibur fragments, and they might be able to ferret out his plans by interrogating Fried. Kiba stepped forward, declaring himself to be part of the search group, but Riaz pulled him aside for a moment, telling him if he wanted to join, he had to explain to the other his reasoning and hatred for Excalibur. He was about to mouth off and say it was none of their business when she slapped him. After all, he was getting a little narrow-minded. Udo, I'm only going to say this once, so listen up. Your friends did not save you so that you could throw your life away to avenge them. They did not die for you just so you would hate Excalibur so single-mindedly. Or do you believe they were that shallow enough to drive you to the brink with hatred? Her words struck a chord in Kiba, who since Irina's explanation about the possibility of it being an Excalibur fragment that Fried used against him, had been seeing nothing but red. He closed his eyes and took a few deep breaths, slowly opening them so that Riaz could see his determination to see this through. Even so, I've already given my word that I would do this. But I promise you I won't run off on my own. Riaz nodded at his words, and the two rejoined their fellow teenagers. Kiba explained how he came to be part of Riaz's peerage. Years ago the church had a secret project running that was supposed to produce artificial holy sword wielders, but this program was focused on creating wielders for Excalibur. Kiba was one of those chosen to be part of the program, enduring harsh training and experiments to be able to use a holy sword. Besides the experiments and harsh training, Kiba and his fellow holy sword project test subjects were treated horribly. They were barely fed, had little to no medical help, and were abused by the ones in charge. Because the project was failing, they decided to kill off the test subjects and bury all evidence of their misdoings. Kiba only managed to escape and survive long enough for Riaz to find him and resurrect him due to their efforts towards allowing one of them to live. The two girls from the church were silent, one not wanting to believe the church capable of such an atrocious act. The other silent because of doubt. Not that Kiba's story was true, but doubt that he would stay calm and rational if she told him what she knew of the one in charge of the project. After everyone had recovered from Kiba's story, it was decided that for now only a small group should be sent out to look for clues. Kiba, Irina, and Zenobia all made perfect sense, but because of how impulsive Zenobia was and Kiba could be, Issei and Sona went with them, making a group of 5. It made more sense that way as Issei was the one to offer the help, so he should be part of the group with the two from the church. Sona and Issei would keep an eye on Kiba and hopefully prevent him from blowing his top. And Irina could use the time to study how Issei and Sona interacted to see if there was even a remote chance she could break them up. Why would she want to do that? Well, part of the reason she reacted so loudly when it was revealed that Issei and Sona were engaged was due to her crush on the boy. Though she was still struggling with herself being able to admit her crush to herself, let alone out loud. Once they were certain their group was ready, the quintet of teens set off, mostly silent. Mostly, instead of completely, because Irina couldn't take the silence and tried to make small talk. She tried to get Issei and Sona to talk about their relationship, but the two kept brushing it aside with comments like, "We can talk later, we've got a job to do," or "Stay focused, there's still a chance of being attacked by Cabial." However, despite the two not revealing anything vocally, Irina was able to piece together a bit more about them from their body language and how close they were. Even though they were tense and focused, both of them prepared to react if their group was attacked. The two engaged devils were touching. Ironically, the only reason Irina was able to notice how tense and focused they were was due to the fact she studied them carefully. Especially since they walked hand in hand, arms slightly linked as Sona rested her head on his shoulder. Normally things like that would help mask how tense Issei's muscles were and help hide his alertness from all but the most trained eye, as the physical connection between the two would partially block a person's ability to see said muscles and how they bunched together. It would also be due to the fact that their embrace would lead to at least a little bit of tension in the muscle anyway, as it would be used in a supportive way since Sona's head was on Issei's shoulder. Since Irina was studying the two so closely, her fellow companion from the church also kept an eye on the two, though Zenobia had to suppress a snort at just how much like a couple they were acting. After all, she was still smart enough to realize that they were trying to be subtle in their search, making anyone that might see the group think it's just a bunch of teenagers spending time together and hanging out. As the group had no leads, it was decided that Kiba would lead them to the spot he battled Fried at, and they'd try to pick up his trail. Surprisingly, it worked better than they thought it would. Being as attuned to holy energy as they were, Irina and Zenobia were able to register the faint traces from Kiba and Fried's battle. Following the lingering wisps of power, the group tracked Fried down. They found him in a nice open clearing in a small forest just outside the city limits. But Fried wasn't alone. Despite the strong want to confront him immediately, Issei and Sona were able to hold the trio of sword wielders back from attacking. At least they were able to prevent them from attacking until after the group had confirmed Cabial wasn't part of the group Fried was chatting with. The reason they had failed was Kiba had recognized one of the men Fried was with and he saw nothing but red, followed quickly by Irina. Even though she had seen enough to tell her that Issei and Sona truly cared for each other, Irina was hoping that she could show off enough for Issei to start falling for her instead. Since Kiba went for an older man with gray hair, Irina went for Fried. Her reason for going after Fried was that out of the small group they had come across, Fried was the largest threat as far as the group knew. Kiba's target saw Fried's eyes widen when Kiba and Irina burst into the clearing, giving the gray-haired man just enough time to dodge Kiba's attack. Frowning at how vicious Kiba was being, the older man continually dodged, even as he cast a signal flare for Cabial to come to their aid. Fried had seen Irina coming and reacted accordingly, pulling out his Excalibur rapidly fragment, quickly overpowering her and throwing her into a tree. Though Issei and Zenobia wanted to help her, they couldn't, both being charged by exorcists wielding swords like Fried. What set these two exorcists apart was the fact that, like Fried, they were wielding holy swords. Zenobia had no trouble dealing with the man that attacked her, keeping him at bay with her Excalibur destruction, swinging it in such a heavy-handed way as to create blades of air to push him back. Issei called out his boosted gear but didn't have any time to attack as his opponent suddenly vanished. Letting his instincts guide him, Issei was able to protect himself from his hidden enemy, managing to prevent any harm to himself. He lashed out with a quick counter once or twice but wasn't able to successfully land a hit. Irina, despite the advantage Fried started the battle with, was able to come back from being thrown into a tree and hold her own effectively, their fight escalating. The 14s current battling the stray priests working for Cabial weren't struggling in their fights per se, but they weren't going to win easily either. Their opponents fighting just hard enough to essentially keep them at bay, or just flat out dodging everything the teens threw their way. Fighting harder and harder, Issei, Zenobia, Irina and Kiba tried to overwhelm their enemies, eventually leading their fights to reach a point where Sona had to shield herself after being struck on accident, and even then a few stray attacks got through. Everyone in the clearing froze when a massive power was suddenly felt. Turning to look skywards, they found a black-haired man with red eyes looking down on them. Flaring his power, the red-eyed man purposefully used it to hold the teens in place. Issei was able to power through the feeling though, and the first thing he did was check on Sona. It hadn't escaped his notice that she had gotten hit by a stray attack earlier. "Alper, take them and finish preparing for the ritual. I'll deal with the trash here." The Cabial's minions followed his order, though right before they got too far Issei flared his power just enough to free his companions. Without turning to look at Cabial or the fleeing opponents, Issei let his power show as he carefully looked over his fiance. Irina couldn't stand not being the one Issei was looking at, nor could she stand that her battle was unfinished. Crying out in anger, she charged after Fried, wanting to distract herself from her crush. Zenobia and Kiba both quickly thought about backing her up, but chose to hold Cabial off, while Issei wasn't bothering to fight. The two struggled to hold the cadre class fallen angel back, both barely surviving his assault long enough for Issei to finish his examination of Sona's injuries. "Kiba, take Sona and find Zophiel. After that regroup with Riaz. Zenobia, I'll keep him busy, attack when you can." Issei spoke before vanishing, suddenly reappearing right behind Cabial with gauntlet-clad fists streaking towards the dark-haired man's head. Cabial blocked it with an arm, while his other hand summoned a spear of light to block Zenobia's sword. Taking a quick breath, Issei leaned back before unleashing a small fireball from his mouth right into Cabial's face. However, Cabial just brought a set of wings up to block, the only sign of Issei's attack being a few singed feathers. Zenobia tried to attack from Cabial's blind spot, only to once again be blocked by a spear of light. I'll be late if we continue this farce. You only have till midnight anyway. If you think you can defeat me, I'll be starting my rampage at your base of operations." But that Cabial disengaged from his fight with Issei and Zenobia before teleporting away. The two shared a look before dashing off to find Irina since she went after Fried. They didn't get very far before being confronted by a silver-haired teen who was carrying Irina. "She's still alive, but I wasn't quick enough to prevent them from taking her Excalibur fragment." "Who the hell are you?" "The name's Vali. Azazel sent me. Since he's currently dealing with a legion of Cabial's followers, he sent me to represent the Grigori in this situation. Honestly though, I was told that unless you couldn't handle the situation, that my job is only to bring Cabial back to headquarters for punishment. So you wouldn't be willing to help defeat Cabial then? If I get tired of waiting, I'll step in, but until then this is your problem. Then why save her?" Azazel hopes that this incident could be used as an excuse for a proper meeting between the three factions. Letting her die wouldn't really help that now, would it? "Fair enough, I guess. Since you said you'd step in if or when you got bored, I guess you'll be keeping an eye on things, so we'll take our leave now." But that Issei took Irina from the silver-haired boy. Turning, he and Zenobia left to regroup with Riaz and Sona. As they moved, Issei called his peerage and his two familiars, asking for them to join him as he talked strategics with Riaz and Sona about how to deal with Cabial. Luckily, when they arrived, Sona had already been seen to by Zophiel, so she could take care of Irina's wounds. Sona had called her peerage together as well, Riaz following their lead after hearing that Issei wanted to come up with a plan. He told his red-headed aunt and his fiancé about Vali and mentioned that they could theoretically attempt to whittle Cabial down enough for Vali to join in. Why would that matter though? You weren't there, so you didn't feel his power. Volley is pretty damn tough. At least as tough as me after a few boosts. That's because he's the host of my rival Albion. Of course he'd be strong, Albion wouldn't accept anything else. Braig spoke up, with his words leading the group to plan to survive long enough for Volley to join in. After all, the white and red dragon emperors together would be quite the challenge. I wonder if you give an evil piece to someone, does it increase their power? It should, though now you have me wondering why you ask. Well, I just thought of something that might help out even more. Issei said, turning to his fiance. He looked her in the eyes to see if she could figure out what his idea was. Fortunately, her genius-level intelligence let her figure his plan. Though she didn't want to specify completely, so she only responded with a general statement. You are thinking about boosting my powers even further by giving me one of your evil pieces, are you? Would it work since you already have a king piece? Don't you remember when we assisted Tannen? He has the queen piece for Mephisto's peerage, but Tannen is also the king of his own peerage. So it would work then. Good. Let's boost your power even further by giving you my queen piece then. The two stepped away from the group to perform the ritual. It also gave them a chance to talk in private. My Gorgon's eye is hard to control, even if your idea works and it becomes strong enough to be used on Cabial. I have no idea if I could make it happen. I have faith that you can do it. Issei kissed her forehead as she laid down and allowed him to place his queen piece over her heart. Finishing the spell, Issei was pleased to see it work. Sona was now his queen. End of the here. So that's it for today's video, guys. Before you go, just like the video and share it with your friends. Bye.